Now, before we start looking at exterior renderings, I want to digress and take a quick look at some of the special materials that you can find in MicroStation. There are several special effects that can be applied to material definitions or set in the Render Setup dialog boxes. Keep in mind that there's a wealth of special materials available in the default MicroStation material palettes, which can be opened through the Materials Editor. And these are often good starting materials that can be edited to meet your needs. Now you'll see that we're in a different drawing here, and this drawing is called Special Materials, and you'll find this on your Working Files folder, and you'll find in a separate folder called Special Materials, which contains this design file and the palette file for the materials here and the matte file. So what you need to do is to copy this folder to your computer, open up the Special Materials design file, which will automatically load the material and the palette file. I've drawn a series of objects here, and I've listed the special type of materials that we're going to look at below. And you'll find that I've applied lighting as well. And for the most part, you don't need specific camera viewpoints. All of these materials, with the exception of depth of field, can be done with a simple fence in this view. So the first material we'll look at is called caustics, and highly reflective materials will produce caustic highlights, which is simply light reflected off or refracted through a material. Now the drawing here is very simple. We have a simple sort of pipe element, which is sitting in a box. The box is important because we need a surface to project the caustic highlights onto. This is the chrome reflection material. And if you look carefully, you'll see that we have a green color. So it's a greenish chrome, highly reflective material. Note that the reflection is 99%. Specular is over 100. So in other words, almost all the light is reflecting off this material. The next important thing is the light source, and we're actually using a directional light. Now, there are obviously lots of lights in this drawing, and they're all turned off, and you don't know which ones they are because I haven't bothered to name them. However, it's quite easy to find them. All we need to do is make sure that the center option is on, as is the highlight. And then when you click on a light, that light will be placed in the center of the view. So every time I do that, the new light pops into place in the center of the view. So if I click on directional light number 1, we see that in the center. So that's the light that I'm interested in. I'm going to turn that on. Now there's nothing special about the lighting itself. It's simply a directional light. So I'm going to remove that one for the moment. Now the next most important thing is the actual render itself. So this is what you get when you select certain rendering settings. And I'm using Interior Best for all of these shots. I'm changing the various information here depending on what I want to achieve. Now in the case of the caustics, we actually have a special caustics rendering setup specifically for caustics. And one thing I want you to note, especially on the Global Illumination tab, is this setting here called Direct Caustics. And it lists the total light particles. And this is a huge number. This is 2.75 million light particles aimed at whatever object our light is looking at. Now, if you compare that with, say, Interior Best and look at the Direct Caustics, if it was on, there's only 10,000. So there's a huge difference between the two. So I want Interior Best, but I want Direct Caustics on, but I want a large number. So I would typically type something on the order of 2 million photons, and more or less depending on the effects you want to create. So I set that up that way. This is the result I got. We're seeing the surrounding box, which has a material called tiled floor attached to it, just to give us some sort of reference in the background. I can see the effects. As I mentioned, this is almost 100% reflection, so we're not seeing through this object at all. What we're seeing here are the reflections of the lines of the tiles, plus the caustic effect on the wall projected from the light off to the right-hand side. So try that for yourself. You have the drawing and you have the settings. I'm going to drop that down, move along to the next one. And here we have a light bulb. Well, let's try and shade that. Yes, we have a light bulb in a light shade. And this material that's attached to this light bulb is called a glow material. And it's technically not a light source in itself. It's merely a material which glows. You see it's a perfectly ordinary material, but the glow is on, and we have a 200 value, which is equivalent to a fluorescent lamp. So the material itself will emit light, although again, technically it's not actually a light itself. The result that we see is this. The light is essentially burnt out at this close range. So what I've done is to place the light here close to our previous object, and I've turned off the directional light. So this is the light from the glow material lighting this object. It doesn't do it very well because it's quite a diffuse light, so we see lots of problems here in the backgrounds. But it is possible to actually light an entire scene from simply glow materials. If you experiment, try turning the light up to, say, a bright neon, 350, and seeing what effect that has. Now let's move on. Go to the next one. We have two here, and they're similar. I'm using the same elements and objects. Now these are simply coloured. They don't have a material attached to them at all. It's simply the primary colours from our regular colour system. I have two spotlights on either side, and we should find out which ones they are using the light manager, which I'll bring back up again. Let's turn the directional light off. We don't need that anymore. And let's figure out where these spotlights are. Well, I'm guessing this one. Yep, that's one of them. So there it is in the center. And I think it's this one too. Yes, there's the other light. That was in the center as well. So there's our two lights. We can turn those two on. There we go. That's lighting up our objects. And what we're doing here is looking at clear coat, which is equivalent to a lacquered surface. Now this is set in the materials. So I'm going to turn that down, look at materials and look at clear coat. Now again, the material is fairly basic, but this is the value that we're interested in here, the 100 clear coat. That's the top of the slider, but you can manually enter a larger number if you wish. Everything else in the material is pretty standard. Let's have a look at the render of that. And as you can see, there appears to be sort of a lacquer on the surface. And we don't even really have a large specular or a large reflect value. They do seem to be reflecting quite nicely. And you can see the reflection of the two spotlights on either side. So try that one too. Zoom out to this one. This is now called bloom. And bloom is a little different. This produces a glare effect. The settings I'm using are a 30% bloom radius and a bloom threshold of 5. You can experiment with different settings for those if you wish. I'm going to drop that down and show you the results of that. That's a bloom effect. It's a sort of a whitish, fuzzy effect that you get in some lighting situations. Well, that's enough to start with. I'll do the rest of these in the next video.